Some artists have the talent to bring memorable and imaginative images into vivid life. How do they do this? How do they not only conceive of the image, how do they execute it? What resources do they draw upon? Life, memory, the history of art, photography, pure imagination? I'm going to ask some artists to tell me the story of how one of their artworks came to be. Be forewarned, there will not be a lot of quick edits in this series. Mostly, you will have a chance to contemplate a single image as its creator tells its story. Randall Exon is a gifted representational painter and longtime art professor at Swarthmore College. He is known for his poetic landscapes, many from Ireland, as well as his mysterious figure compositions. I asked him about one of my favorites.
I think I called it Bleachers because it really was about the perspective underneath the bleachers.
So how did you get the idea for it, and how did you realize it?
One beautiful spring afternoon, I was passing the local high school here, Strathaven, and I saw that they were having a track meet. And I thought, well, this might be a good opportunity to get some photographs. The people kind of mulling around. I was really interested in the athletes between events, what they were doing, and so on. I did two paintings based on that kind of track scene. The Bleachers was, I think, my favorite one. The other one got very formal in a way, the composition. The Bleachers was a little more improvised. So I had this photograph of this kid in this yellow silk jacket.
Green.
Well, yeah, I changed it to green. I didn't like yellow that much back in those days. I do more now. But I liked that kind of emerald green that I came up with. So that was one thing I changed. Then the other thing, the negative shapes between the limbs. This is what I learned from Surah. It's just such a great example of like really nailing down edges, using the negative shapes to create more of a sculptural quality to the figure. So that particular photograph worked pretty well for me, but I think I still did have to do quite a bit of work along the edges of the figure to get it to look more three-dimensional. I mean, that's one thing a photograph never does, is create, unless it's a beautifully set up professional photograph, but the vast, vast majority of time, it lacks the sculptural kind of three-dimensionality that you can see in a painting. So that was one thing. And then the other two figures were entirely made up, the boy on the bicycle and the girl, or it may not be a girl, but it's a person in a dress, cropped off, coming in from the side with a very closely cut haircut. I knew I wanted to paint this silk jacket, and I knew that this photograph I had of this boy was good, and it helped me set the stage. So I put him on the stage, and then I was figuring out what to do. Then the idea of the bleachers behind him came next, I think. Maybe at the same time, the figure of the boy on the bicycle, kind of coming toward him. But that created this triad in the middle of the composition, and I wasn't happy with that compositionally, and I thought a figure coming in off the side, maybe with a particular line. I just started sketching on the canvas, eventually arrived at that gesture. I was happy with that. I originally had the intention of putting hair on the figure, but then there was something about just the skull, just the head, that I liked. The androgyny in the figure, it added to the complexity of the psychology in it. So the idea, I think, ultimately became about young people's lives. When I was in high school, what went on under the bleachers was very different than what went on above the bleachers, right? The kind of melodrama, people meeting up, and there might have been sexuality involved, but it wasn't even that. It was just the tensions between young people. I always found that space beneath bleachers really fascinating, psychologically. And so it became kind of about that. The figure in the dress seemed to set off what I wanted psychologically in the piece, which was something that was a little bit like what's going on slightly unnerving.
There's a sense of longing in her glance, the way she's looking at the boy.
Yeah, yeah. I've just always been fascinated with that coming-of-age story. I was never interested in the sexual part, like somebody like Balthus, for instance. I was more interested in the broader psychological. Every year, there's another set of kids moving out into the adult world. That transition between childhood and adulthood, I've always found that really loaded in a nice way. Society always replacing itself, but renewing itself too.
Randy, there are a few other elements that you added. You have crows and you have that white shoe.
I wasn't too specific about the symbolism. I wasn't going to books on symbolism. I didn't want to be hampered by that. Crows are a feature of this landscape where I live. They capture something of the drama that I was trying to get into the piece. I think in recent years I've kind of realized there's more of a cinematic aspect to my work than I realized early on. Images that I've seen in movies, like a detective movie, where there might be a shoe on the street. You have no clue what that is, but the imagery of it, if it's photographed well and it's integrated into the scene and to the storyline, that terrible scene in Blue Velvet where they find the ear in the grass. I'm still really interested in trying to provoke a mystery without giving any kind of summing up or conclusions or anything,
Do you find that these figure compositions are difficult to do or to come up with ideas for?
I think today it's really difficult to come up with ideas that seem authentic. I really admire anybody who's taking on the challenge of it, but I think quite often you see forced narratives going on, and I could be accused of that, I guess, but you also see just a bunch of nudes sitting around a room. It's just like why are these people sitting around in this room? I've always felt very lucky that I'm a representational painter because I find the world around me full of potential. And I'm a studio artist. I go out and paint in plein air, but I prefer to go out and work up a composition and then come back in the studio and try to see what happens. So I'm much more of a Whistler in my approach to it, I think. And there's no way Whistler was doing those nocturnes out there in the dark. Or you look at a Hopper, these are constructed, but they come out of an experience. They come out of seeing something. And then it's about getting the memory of that in your head. So I always loved Nighthawks. His process in the Nighthawks is exactly the process I use, which is you're walking down the street, you see a coffee shop, you look inside, you see some people. A couple minutes later, after you've passed it, you say to yourself, gee, that might be a pretty interesting painting. You go back and it's all changed, right? So you might take a photograph of it. He didn't work from a photograph, not that I know of. But you realize, okay, I just experienced something that I think has real potential as a painting. And so then he goes back and the real work begins. And I don't know if you've ever seen those sequence drawings of that composition and how that developed. It's just the way a film director would put an image together. Everything is in just the right place. The beginning sketches are pretty dull, nothing interesting. And then gradually he starts working these diagonals in it of the big window and the street. And man, the whole thing just snaps. Okay, this is the design that I'm going to work with. Then he builds it from there. I think if you're really preoccupied with design and coming up with interesting compositions and opportunities for using figures in design, then it doesn't become so much about the figure. It becomes about the larger composition and the space that you're trying to set up in this painting. Hopper was just always such a guiding figure, and that painting of the usherette, the movie theater, that's a perfect example of what I'm talking about. That's, if I could even get close to that in a painting, that's what I'm after all the time.
What is it about that you think is so great?
I love the psychology of it, but I also like the incredible problem he set up for himself, where he's dividing the painting in half. But it works beautifully from a thematic point of view, because it's this woman under a lamp, lost in thought, who's seen the movie 20 times and isn't thinking about the movie. She's thinking about something else, while everybody else, their heads are staring at this black and white screen. The dichotomy between the world that this woman is in and everybody else lost in the movie, it's just fantastic stuff.
Well, you didn't do preliminary drawings or anything for this, did you?
Well, I did, but I'll tell you, in those days I never took those drawings seriously. I just wanted to get it on the canvas as soon as possible. I never really was one to get a drawing on a page and then go, oh, that's what I want, and then transfer that to the painting. I'll get a kind of sketch. Although more and more I found that I run into fewer problems if I work out my problems in the drawings first. The painting I just finished was of a trampoline. Over there in Ireland, it's kind of funny because out in the middle of this farmland along the coast, just about every farmhouse has a trampoline in the back. Their kids have to have something to do, so they set up these trampolines. I finally decided I was going to incorporate it into a figure painting. It's sort of my ascension, I guess. I got this figure, and she's barefoot in a raincoat. She's jumping up, and then there are figures encircling her around the trampoline. A couple of them are playing instruments. I really had a great time with it. That's a kind of Irish version of it. Now I want to do a larger American version of it. I don't want anybody stealing my idea at this point because I don't know of anybody else who's done a trampoline painting, but they're great for figures.
Did you use photographs?
This is the other thing of working from observation and working from life and really learning how to draw. Whatever limitations I might have with my drawing, I know how to draw the figure out of my head, and I can animate it. A lot of it is trial and error, and I keep pushing forward. I find anymore it's the only way to do it. If I have an idea for a gesture and I need details like the fold in a coat, if it's anything that I need to get in and really do detailed work, if I had a model, I'd much rather light them and stand there and do it. It's more pleasurable. But if I don't have a lot of time or I don't have a model, just asking somebody to put a coat on and take a photograph of it, I think I can work with that. So it's like a sketch. It's a means to an end. It's not the end in and of itself. I will say Chuck Close is the only one who I think did a pretty good job of making the photograph the end in and of itself. I was never a big fan until I saw those different ways he would fill in the grid. I think there's a place for it. You do have to be careful with it, and you can't be stupid with it. But we've got so many great examples of people who have been smart using photographs. And students today, they're going to work from them no matter what. So hopefully it might make for work that's more distinctive for younger artists than the standard observational painting that has become pretty well set. I mean, they're really good people doing that, you know. I don't know if we need another generation.
Randy, I can't thank you enough for helping me to inaugurate this series. I have many friends who paint in that standard observational manner that Randy referenced. So-called perceptual painters who only work from life and eschew photographic reference. For them, it works. But I realized there are many ways to create a compelling image, and I hope soon to bring you some more stories of how an image is conceived and realized through an artist's mind, eye, and hand.